with us today who are truly experts in the language access that's going on here in Pittsburgh. I am your moderator today. My name is Rachel Shepard. I'm the Deputy Director of the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations. We are the official civil rights agency for the City of Pittsburgh, investigating complaints of discrimination in housing, but also in employment and public accommodations and city services. Just to get started here today, just to go over really briefly what the commission does. Again, we're investigating complaints of discrimination, but we're also here to do education and outreach to let people know that we exist, that we're a free service, that we offer, translation and interpretation at no cost to the complainant or respondent, and that we don't ask things like citizenship status. We don't record that information. We do not report that information to anyone. So you should, feel safer with us. That wasn't the right way to phrase it. Sorry about that. But anyway, so let's move on to our presenters. I'm going to let them introduce themselves here and take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. And hello, everyone online. My name is Jayne McCullough. I'm a former / current translator and interpreter who's been in the field for about 20 years. And about 10 years ago, I started really advocating for language accessibility because I was really frustrated that, hospitals, schools didn't have any infrastructure to support language access. So I've been beating the drum for a really long time and been really fortunate to be in a city like Pittsburgh where there's so many great people doing work in this area. I'm the founder director of Wordsmiths, which is a local language services provider that also does language access advocacy work. In adjunct professor of applied translation and translation technologies at Akintola University. And I'm on the board of directors of the Alliance for Refugees for Education. Here.
Yeah, I'll sit there. So that way we don't have to lean and switching the microphone. I am Guillermo Velazquez. I am the executive director of the Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Corporation. And we are a nonprofit organization that is pushing forward the Latino community in the region to focus on economic development. And so I came to this country 27 years ago on an exchange program, knowing that I was going to stay. And when you arrive at a new region, whether you speak the language or not, so even if you do speak the language, it's still a challenge to be able to navigate it, to be able to understand a region, a new city. So the work that we do at the Hispanic Corporation is important. We help people to navigate access to those things that are available. And sometimes we don't know because of being shy, because there's the culture, maybe something that suppresses the area.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today and the work that you all do for the community. We want to get started today by asking what are some of the current and upcoming programs that you would like Pittsburghers to know about?
Yes, well, we actually have a presentation. I don't know how you want me to go about the presentation, but okay, yeah, so we'll come here. Well, my presentation is I don't know the slides, but I'll try to go quickly because then if you want, we can go switching. So the housing program that we have at the Hispanic Corporation, because we're focused on economic development. We believe that access to housing is important to Latino families because of language and culture. And often we find that it's very difficult for landlords to communicate with families. So what we do is establish a network of landlords that we call them flexible landlords. And so this landlord basically collaborate with us in our program and understand the limitations that all the families have. We can move to the next slide. You can see the number of families that we have in helping 2017. Also today, placed 97 families in houses. These are families that perhaps will be living in an apartment, and where they may have 2 or 3 children. And they wish they would be living in a house where the children can play in a backyard or so, because they're limited in language. And also, sometimes these families have not lived here long enough to have a good credit history. So that's how we come in place. And we're working with landlords to help them to get access to this type of properties. We move to the next slide. We see that we track the concept of origin where all these people are coming. And because anything that may be happening at a worldwide level could be affecting Pittsburgh already, such as a hurricane in Puerto Rico, or such as political change in any of the Latin American countries, will drive away the people to arrive, and therefore, we have to have this type of organization to address those issues. On the right, we see different neighborhoods where we have been able to place families. As you can see, Beechview is the highest one because historically, throughout the last 10 years, Beechview was the place for Latinos. But nowadays, Beechview is saturated. So now we're trying to explore other neighborhoods by working with council members and trying to access different real estate companies or landlords that we can work with to create more diversity. Some of you may not know, but the majority of Hispanics tend to live in the south, on the Monongahela River, from the Ohio River towards that way. So we're trying to push more people to this part of the city so that we can have more diversity. Moving to the next slide, we can see here the properties that we have access to, and we actually have access to about 300 properties. Right now, we have placed families in 97. So as of last Monday, after our last meeting, we had 16 families on a waiting list. So that tells you that people are moving to Pittsburgh, and it's a good thing for the region because we're attracting people. So it's a good thing to be able to insert these people in properties and be able to have access to them. Moving to the next slide, you can see here that the navigation program that we have is nothing but this housing program is nothing more than a navigation program where we help people to understand what are their needs culturally and appropriately address what they're looking for. You'll be surprised at the things that we learn when we talk to our family. And you only are able to serve them correctly if you can speak the language. That's why language access is very important, and I'm glad that this topic is being addressed here. So we do have navigators, navigators. These are people that work in the office. They are usually the people that are assisting these families. Spanish speaking navigators and Portuguese speaking navigators, because a lot of people have the misconception of the Latino community that everybody speaks Spanish, and yes, but you also have the Brazilians, and the Brazilians speak Portuguese. So we would like to be able to provide services in Portuguese. We'll move forward to the next slide, and we can see here, you can see more or less the process that we have whenever we are working with a family. So because we are the only Latino organization that has a housing program, we do get referrals. We get referrals from other Latino organizations such as Casa San Jose, the Latino Community Center, or online, whichever it may be, or any other organization. So then, we go into the process where we immediately have to contact somebody to make sure that that person someone has been able to speak to them. We don't want people to be waiting, at least to know what's going on. And then going through the process of understanding their needs and being able to know, based on the properties that we have access to, which one will work best for them. Now, let me tell you something. Sometimes we have to make decisions because a family, even though they may need a property, sometimes we just have to place them in a property where they can be for 6 months or even a year. And we tell them, listen, we know that you want to be in this area. We know that you want your children to go to this school, but for now, let's work in this plan. And then next year, when we renew the lease, we move you to another location. So sometimes it's just about being able even to negotiate with the family, because sometimes they're not ready to be where they want to be. So it has to be almost like a plan that we have to develop for them so that they can understand and work with us so that that can happen. We found out that the main problem that was going on between landlords and Latino tenants was not being able to communicate. For example, the landlord who complained that the family was not cleaning the snow, that the family was not cutting the grass, and we'll go and talk to the family and this, why are you're not doing this? Why are you're not doing that? And they said, well, I didn't know that I had to do it. And then we go back to the landlord, and the landlord said, well, they signed the lease, and the lease says they're responsible for that. And then we go back to the family, and they said, well, you signed this lease. And they said, well, I signed the lease, but I didn't know what the lease said. So we translate the leases from landlords, not because they have to sign that lease, simply because we want the people to actually understand what is in the lease. So we go page by page, explaining paragraph by paragraph. And if there's a section that they don't understand, it's in Spanish, so they can't say that I didn't understand. They can't say that what they're signing, was something from another planet. No, so then, it's a way to kind of like find a balance where we can meet and agree to the things that the landlord is asking as part of the lease. There have been occasions where we have families, as we are going through the lease, they say, I don't want to clean the snow. And they refuse to do that. And it's okay. So at that point, we say, okay, it's okay. So that means that this property is not going to be for you. We're going to look at another property where you don't have to clean the snow. So, sometimes it's a process of educating also people. They're not ready to do that. And we just go through the process of educating the families as we are doing this as well. And in talking about education, so one of the things that we do during the spring and during the fall, we have home ownership clinics. So that means that we gather organizations that focuses on educating people to be able to eventually own a house. So in our community, it's very different because most of everyone who is here now in Pittsburgh have come either from another city, another state, or another country. And most of the people, or most of the Latino people, where they come from, their parents and their grandparents never had savings. So the countries where they come from, the culture of savings doesn't exist, because most of those countries are in inflation. So people don't save, people can hardly actually have money to eat and live. So that's not there embedded in the, in past 3 generations. So when we have families that are here, how are they going to pass that to their children? So their children they're not able to learn that. So we're trying to first, work with the parents, try to develop that culture of savings so that they can little by little pass it to their children at some point. Now it's a process of being able to own a house. So we have learned that people first need to understand what it means to buy a house. They need to understand terminology. A lot of them, they do not know what an escrow account is, so it has to be explained to them. And that takes about a year. And after that, then we start with the process of actually, what are we going to do to build your credit? So that goes on for another year or two when we work with families to actually build their credit. They get on plans, and we work with the different institutions so that those that are moving towards that direction can actually do that. And so that eventually, after 2 years or so, we're talking already 3 years, families can finally obtain a letter of credit and then get assigned a bilingual realtor so that they can start doing home shopping. So it's a long process in our experience with language. More than perhaps it would be with English-speaking family, where you can probably turn around that in 1 year. I'm not saying that everybody has to be like that. We're saying that what we have seen the longest tends to be 3 years. It can be 2 years, or it can be 1 year for some families. It all depends on how somebody may get actually into the system and understand what they have to do. So then we work with different programs that exist. So that's why we love to have our relationship with the URA and any other nonprofit or private institutions where they may have programs where, families, we talk about access navigation. And so this is where the families basically come to us, or sometimes they don't even know. So we are the ones who have to say, listen, we know of a program that you could benefit for it. And so that's how we have been able to help families. That in this particular case, in this slide, you can see that this person applied for a loan for $50,000 to do an improvement in their existing house. So those are people who already own houses, but they actually can add more value to their houses. So in a way, we're actually working with those families so that their properties can have more value and obviously create more wealth in the region. And so we're the only Latino organization that was passing financial assistance for those that were affected during the COVID pandemic. And so what we do is look for programs that were available through the government, and also non-government programs and programs that we develop through foundations where we raise money, because not all of the families qualify for the government programs. So the main idea was to help families for two reasons. One, for health reasons, because they could be running desperate and trying to expose themselves to COVID and creating, therefore, perhaps even passing the disease to their relatives. And the second one, for economic reasons, so that landlords will be more, the situation between landlords and tenants will be more stable, and also families who would like to stay in Pittsburgh and not go away to another place or another city, because they will run in a desperate situation where they say, well, I can't really be here in Pittsburgh anymore. So together we almost passed about $1 million to more than basically 700 individuals, which is a lot of families that you can see there. We still continue to do rent assistance through other programs that still exist, and we're trying to develop new ones as we speak with the government and so on, particularly for people that have language access difficulty. And in this slide is very interesting because as a result of the pandemic, what happened once the protection was no longer there for families that could not pay their rent, people started to get evicted. And so one of the things that we saw were Latino families being evicted, but not being able to have legal representation in Spanish, or not being able to understand what's going on. So then we are part of a network. It's called a lab, which is actually a program of the URA. And so this program provides navigation access and legal representation, in this particular case in Spanish, so that people can have fair treatment. Right now we're working in 68 cases that are going on. And the stories that I can tell you are many, but I can refer to just one of them where we have a single father from Brazil who has to work while their children are in school. And so, that's when you encounter these difficulties of people, going through an eviction, but still trying to make a live and everything else. So I think I'm about to finish. I just have a few slides to go there. And I think, I think that's the last one. Yeah, that's the last one. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I wanted to tell you about what's going on in the Latino community, and I'll be glad to answer some questions whenever, now or at the end of the presentation.
Okay. We'll give Mary Jayne and Dave a little favor, not going to introduce yourself. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna pass this to Faye, and then the question is, what kind of programs do we want to announce that are upcoming?
Thank you. Sorry, guys. Good to see your faces on a lovely Saturday. Feyisola, Akintola, I work in the mayor's office. I manage an office of immigrant and refugee affairs. So you want me to talk about some of the work we're doing? No? Yeah? Yes? Okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, so language access, in regards to language access. A lot. So we started this work back in 2017. And the whole idea was, again, we're thinking of, okay, we're growing the immigrant and refugee population. what is the best way to remove any barrier that prevents those groups from interacting with city government? Right, I think about myself as an immigrant. When my parents and I came to America, we came to Atlanta, Georgia first. We were fortunate enough to speak English, right? But I tried to imagine if you're coming to a country, and we actually went to Atlanta because my parents had, my mom had a lot of her siblings there. So we knew that was the best way to kind of get to know the culture in America, right? So when you have siblings that can help you navigate the system. So I try to put myself in that position for someone who doesn't speak the language. How can you expect them to interact with government? One, and two is the fact that government is probably the least place that you even tend to look at for any issues. You either go to your faith community, you go to your immediate family. But what caught me off guard was to think like, wait, there was a role in city government that exists to help think of these things. How do we help remove barriers? How do we help to create opportunity for our immigrant and refugee population by working with partners such as the amazing folks that you see on the panel today? So anyway, just to go back, in 2017, and we started to think through, okay, we needed language access, we're growing our populations, and if we expect them to interact with government, it wasn't going to be magic, right? They needed to be practical tools that were in place. So we started to work with a language vendor, making sure that some of our front-facing departments had telephonic interpretation available. So like our 311 for non-emergency services, our public safety was one too, because we've been hearing things using children as interpreters, and we knew that those were quite problematic, right? So we wanted to make sure, okay, they were equipped with the tools to interact with government. We started making our way to Office of Municipal Investigation, our Parks and Recs, and tried to grow it out from there. Now we're still doing the same thing. Luckily, we've landed a new language access vendor in city government, someone that we're happy because she has a pulse to the ground, right? Someone that can kind of help work with us as city government to make sure we're serving our populations. We're currently working, Howard is in the building, who's been helpful. PHDC, with Guillermo, we're working on a lease agreement as well. We know that some of our populations are, diverse populations are entering into lease agreements that they don't even understand, right? They don't speak the language. So how do we work with those kind of landlords to have leases in different languages so that the landlords could be able to use and enter into an agreement with a tenant, right? And so many of those things are what we're thinking about. Internal policies. Our mayor has a goal of making sure we have universal signage that are in different languages. When you walk into the city county, how could we help you navigate city government if you weren't an English speaker? Those are some of the things that we're starting to think about, and we're working with community because we don't ever pretend to be the ones who know the answers. I think this is working in partnership with our community members, our organizations that have the ear to the ground to help influence some of the work that we're doing. Did that answer some questions?
Awesome, thanks, babe. Great to see you. Yeah, and as far as my organization, Global Wordsmiths, and then myself also just as an advocate, volume for the back. I'll try to, does this help if I speak a little closer to the microphone also? Great. So in terms of things that Global Wordsmiths and myself do, both as an organization and then myself as an advocate, is we try to really teach people about language access because I spent the first half of my career kind of yelling at people, right? And saying like, you know, you have to provide interpretation. It's a civil right, as you can see on my sticker. But people kind of shut down, I think, when you yell at them, which is not surprising. And so I put a lot of thought and time into, you know, what are the actual systemic barriers to linguistic accessibility and how can we fix them in a way that's effective and sustainable. So in terms of programming, I do a lot of teaching where I go in as part of our social impact work and we just do trainings, you know, for free for staff members at hospitals or schools who are maybe dealing with new influx of populations from, you know, all over the world, kind of in second and third ring suburbs, as well as in the city of Pittsburgh, wherein, you know, the nurses or the teachers just might not know what to do, right? And so right now we're gearing up for all of our 2024 impact programs. One is is going to be a campaign to target different organizations with that kind of education.
And another is the return of our language access project program. And this program is really exciting to me because what we do is we take bilingual university students as interns. We're pretty picky about who we hire, and they will have native level language skills, but they've never been trained, right? So we train them in terms of how to interpret and how to translate accurately, completely, ethically within the best practices. And then we mentor and support them while they provide free language services to area nonprofits. And applications will go out soon for area nonprofits to apply. So it's a structured program where we choose nonprofits and then the students, and we partner them and supervise and mentor the students. And a lot of what we try to do as part of that is to teach students who maybe are being asked to volunteer as an interpreter that they should be paid for that time, right? And that they can develop a really hard skill that will help them in their careers, and that they shouldn't accept low wages, and that they should assert that the people they are interpreting for have rights and that they have rights. Because a big part of the issue is that, again, it's not just that service providers don't understand the importance of language accessibility, but non-English speaking communities may not understand that they also have the right to interpret. So really just kind of advocating for people to take the onus off of community members to ask for interpretation, to provide interpretation, to take the onus off of community-based nonprofits to provide interpretation, and to start building their own infrastructure, right? And budgeting and whatnot. So those are the kind of programs we have going on right now, and always, as well as just kind of trying to be partners to the city, to other nonprofits in the area, to help us all figure this problem out, right? Because I don't think if you look at language accessibility, we would tolerate the same level of inequity in any other corner of our society, but for some reason with language access, it's not really on people's radar, because I think people do think like, well, somebody will help, right? There will be a family member who can help or a volunteer, but it's time for us to all start actually building sustainable programming, which is one thing I love about Pittsburgh and the commission and the mayor's office, is that they're doing that work, as well as, like Guillermo's organization and lots of great nonprofits in the area. So
I'd like to add something. Sometimes we confuse the terms translation with interpretation. There are times where you can translate, you literally translate word by word, and that is effective. But sometimes interpretation is needed because the idea has to be passed to a person that doesn't understand the complexity of a topic. And often we have to do that and ask that with our partners, for example, with bankers or financial institutions, because they have a workshop to teach families about credit building or about financial management. So there are all these topics that could be complex for somebody who has never been exposed to them. And so normally we tell them, can we see your presentation? So we always like to see the presentation first to understand the content, and then we give recommendations to them in terms of adjustments or maybe just, an idea or images, because sometimes people understand better with images. Depending on who this presentation may be, only because when we have been working with banks, for example, you can tell the presentations were made by people that are very way up here. They're designed for those people. And then they say, oh, we're gonna do this presentation in the Latino community. And then boom, they bring their presentation. Though just the way it is, think that it's gonna be as affected into the Latino community, and it's not. So unfortunately, sometimes we have to ask them to change that. And often, sometimes there may be a slide where we just make the point of what they're trying to convey to the families or so that we want to make sure the families understand what is it that they're looking at. So I just wanted to make sure that that's an important component, specifically in this kind of event that we're talking right now with language access, translation, interpretation.
Thank you all so much. Each one of you is absolutely essential. I truly appreciate, PHDC for having, a process at every stage of the home, obtaining a home, renting a home, getting financing to redo your home and make essential updates. It's absolutely, essential. And Faye, your model lease that you all are working on, I'm so happy about that. And it's been a pleasure being a part of the Language Access Learning Collaborative for the City of Pittsburgh and the county to be able to share resources and really just come together on this issue. And, Mary Jayne, your team has been essential, particularly for the commission over the years with translating our documents and really getting us up to par with what we should be doing with language access, as a public service provider. So I really just want to thank you all. I'd like to move into, some of the laws and regulations that people might not realize protect them when they're seeking language access. So the Commission on Human Relations is, an anti-discrimination organization. We investigate complaints of discrimination. Preferred language is one of the protections that we offer. National origin, ancestry. We're looking at, if we're looking at race or place of birth, these are also protections that we offer, and all of them really can be tied to a preferred language or, even a dialect that someone is using, or even having an accent is a protection. And these things are, protected by the Fair Housing Act under the national origin protection. So people can file with us if they think that they've been discriminated against when it comes to obtaining housing, housing advertising, and anything having to do with the terms and conditions of their housing. I want to turn it over to you all though, and what you have been experiencing. What are you seeing with regard to, the protections that people don't know exist in your work?
Sure. And that's very important for us because sometimes we're no more worried about the education that we can give to the families that we're serving, but the neighbors that they live with around the area, because I think the neighbors don't understand sometimes the limitations that there exist. So we encounter situations where, we have had cases where, the cats and the dogs, between the neighbors, and then often, neighbors using the fact that, you don't speak English, making those statements, people shouldn't be making those statements to people just because they don't speak English. And, it's about respect, I think, but also, what people should know also beyond that. Even sometimes landlords, not being able to understand the limitations just because of the fact that, you're talking to a human being regardless of where they're from. And I'm not speaking just for the Latinos, I'm speaking in general for anybody. And so I think that one point I want to make is that this country historically has been able to advance because of immigration. And so that's something that should still be there and should continue to be there. The good thing that that happens now is that the difference between 200 years ago or 300 years ago, whatever that may be, is that now we can actually control it. Now we can actually do something more systematic and organized to be able to have better outputs.
Yeah, and in terms of the legal basis for language access, there's a lot of precedent and there's a lot of history in this country around this kind of discrimination. And the current kind of mainstream narrative about the legal requirements revolve around Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. There's also an executive order called EO 13166 that was put forth in the 1990s that kind of further clarifies what federally funded entities are required to do with regard to language access. But there's still some kind of stuff that's unclear in terms of, are nonprofits, responsible for this or only government agencies, and kind of whether or not somebody, landlords might be federally funded through grants or through the programs they participate in. And so I always encourage people to find out, what exactly they're responsible for as well as they can. There are also some protections within I think Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. And interestingly, so I do a lot of consulting with governments all over the country to help them kind of build language access policy and planning. And when I say that the narrative is really centered around Title VI, it's because the Department of Justice has a website called lep.gov, where you can go to find out kind of what the law says, what the requirements are. There's a lot of resources and information that help people figure out, what to do, how to be compliant. But I like to push back against Title VI as being the only narrative, right? Because you can't really bring a legal case in court against Title VI. You can only do a Department of Justice complaint. Now, these can still be really costly for cities and for governments and for organizations because the DOJ can say, you're required to provide, your whole police force with a whole bunch of training year after year, and this can be really costly, right? So it's still consequential and it's still a big deal. But I've been kind of looking into the 14th Amendment lately, which is constitutionality, right? And that's much more kind of immovable, and the narrative of constitutionality in this country tends to have a lot of support, right, on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. And this amendment also protects civil rights based on national origin, and language has been found to be a proxy for that in a lot of different legal cases. So the big laws, Fair Housing Act in the context of housing, right, ACA with regard to healthcare. But on a federal level, there are also, really clear laws. And on the state and county level, there's all kinds of ordinances and legislation also to be on the lookout for. So I would just encourage people to, especially landlords or people who have housing programs, to look into each of those laws and find out, what your responsibilities are in terms of compliance. Because unfortunately, as language access is kind of growing in importance, and different cities and counties and governments all over the country are starting to kind of do language access work. Also, the number of Department of Justice complaints is on the rise. The number of lawsuits under different, legislation and ordinances is also on the rise. So I always kind of frame it in the context of self-protection, right? And make sure that you know what you're required to do. Thank you, that's good. I think just hearing Mary Jayne talking, we're thinking about how, when we know that ADA has been something that has been prevalent far more before language access came. And then so language access with my colleagues across different cities, those are things that we're still thinking about. What does that look like within city government? What does that look like within county government? How can we be more proactive about making sure that we're instituting policies that really make sure that people know, look, you have to abide by these, this is better serve our communities. But I'm thinking about a couple of years ago, maybe it's 1 or 2 years, we hired a language access consultant to do a language access plan for us. I know he went around to different of our departments and such, and he started to talk about ways that we need to be compliant, even our building physically. How, God forbid we got a lawsuit because of certain things. So again, I think all to say, we're still building on things. I don't think we'll ever have it perfect, especially with Pittsburgh having such an old city. Buildings are so old. There's always going to be something. But I think what's great about our leadership and as a city, us being committed to the fact that we're willing to work with the community to make sure we better serve our constituents. One example is with our police. So with CHECH, I can't remember what CHECH stands for. You would know. You were part of, but Wordsmiths was a part of that team because we really wanted to make sure, public safety again, to come back to that was really equipped. As you guys know, we look at data, we see that our population is going down, right? But the only thing that steadily increases is the immigrant and refugee population. That's the only thing that is keeping the city afloat when it comes to its numbers. And we know that, I think Mary Jayne or Guillermo, you said this, we're only going to continue to see that. So this is something that as a city, as an entity, as an organization, as a nonprofit, if you want to be more competitive, if you really want to be welcoming, if you really want to be seen as an organization that serves people, that we all start to take this on. How can I have language access within my small business? How can I have language access between my nonprofit? How can I make way or take advantage of the program that Mary Jayne teaches, where they have students go to nonprofits and help? So you might not be able to afford it, but this is something that you can apply to do it. But anyway, within public safety, really make sure, again, they taught about cultural orientation, because it's one thing to have language access, but if you don't even understand the reasoning behind it, it's easy for you to take advantage of it or take it for granted, right? But to really understand what they mean when they say these things, or when they behave in a certain manner, or things that you don't necessarily understand. So it's teaching more than language, it's teaching culture, things that tend to stick a little bit more to us. But again, as city government, we're constantly thinking through what can the community, what could we do to change and challenge policies within our government to make improvements for our constituents.
Thank you so much. If we're talking about unlawful practices in the city of Pittsburgh, when it comes to housing, we're looking at a difference in terms and conditions of your housing. So if you speak a different language as your primary language, and you can't access certain parts of your amenities because you can't read the signs, and you cannot navigate your way to those amenities, that's a difference in terms and conditions. Harassment, you are not permitted to be harassed because you speak a different language, because you can't communicate with the landlord. They should not be berating you because you can't understand them. They should not be, yelling loudly in your face because they think that you just can't understand for some other reason. The denial of rental or sale is a big one that we see, because if you cannot speak the language fluently, if you cannot speak English fluently, then they will often just turn you away on that basis. They will not answer your phone call. They will not return your voicemail or your email, and you will go, you will go by the wayside. Making housing unavailable. If you had someone else call for you because you know that you don't speak the language, and they set up an appointment for you, and when you show up, they hear an accent, and then they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, this has already been rented." That's making housing unavailable. And when it comes to discriminatory statements in advertising, I mean, it could be something as obvious as saying, English speaking only, people who speak a different language need not apply. If it can be that obvious sometimes. Bringing it back to our panelists, what are some of the unfair practices that you believe are prevalent in Pittsburgh housing?
Well, so the list can be very long. Some of the ones that you just mentioned, we see them. I think that we were able to overcome them because we are in the middle. Otherwise, they will be very predominant and happening with landlords. So we, in a way, we're breaking that barrier for that not to happen. I think the one that we see the most that is prohibiting our organization to place families in houses is the inability to be able to run a credit check on our families, where these are families that have arrived less than a year or less than 5 years to the region, and landlords suspect, because these are landlords that rent properties for several years, and they're used to being able. They want to make sure that the family is going to be able to pay them, and so the process is, let's ensure that they have credit, that they can pay their bills. And so that's something that sometimes we're unable to play families because of the credit check. And so I don't know if there's anything that can be done in that respect or not. We, in a way, I would say, informally serve as a credit check, meaning that our housing navigator checks the income, how much are they making? And so it just presents the facts. Sometimes it's not enough what employers may say because they don't have a pay stub, they don't have any of that. So often what we have to do is open a bank account and then have the family deposit the money in the bank account so that we can prove that there's money in the bank. So it's a whole process that we have to do. So it just makes things different. But many times we see families not being able to have access to a house simply because of that. So that's a big limitation for us.
Yeah, and I think my information about this might be a little outdated, but when I was interpreting in the field, mostly for social service providers, so I go into the home and interpret for families, I would hear a lot of families say things like, somebody broke my window and I keep trying to call the landlord, but they won't call, they won't call me back, so I have to put, duct tape over it, or reporting unsafe conditions, making sure that ice is cleared, or everything's working properly, there's running water, because there's no mechanism for people to contact landlords if they don't speak the language, right? And so again, we get back to the systemic issue, and I think there are in many cases kind of deliberate, kind of actions by landlords, but also in many cases, people just don't understand also on their end how to communicate with tenants, right? And I think, I said earlier, the first 10 years of my career were spent yelling at people, and some people do deserve to be yelled at, but I found that teaching landlords in a disarming way, or in a non-disarming way, this is what you're required to do. Here are some resources and tools, right? And sharing those tools with people so that they're able to open up channels of communication with people is kind of where I like to start, because I think it's more asset-based and can be more productive. So I don't necessarily have the answer of a lot of the unfair practices, but I'm very solutions-based. And when I look at those landlords who are receptive to building infrastructure, right, who are receptive to doing this work, I think just working on giving them tools so that they understand, we have to call people back. And it's not as hard as you think it's going to be, and that kind of stuff is my angle on it.
Something I'm thinking about is a couple of years ago, we did this program, Renting to Refugees program. The reason why we did this was because we were hearing that people had misinformation when it came to refugees and immigrants that were coming into the city. So we worked with our resettlement agencies. CHR was a part of the table, and folks in town to really come up with a program that was meant to educate landlords about what does it mean to do that. I know people are so quick to be like, oh no, they don't speak languages. Or what did I hear? They come with, had someone email me, no, they always come with bed bugs. Just things that, were hurtful. But then again, it's that idea of people just need to be educated. So we came up with a program that one started with the caseworkers and our resettlement agencies to really educate people about, one, when you're asking for rental history and you're asking for all this communities that are coming don't have that. They're coming from refugee camps, right? There is no rental history they could provide for you. Or again, when it comes to credit score, they have no credit. They're just coming, all those different things that I understand reasons, to be honest, why we probably have it here. But for people to realize they have to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to other constituents, because we're all not the same, right? We all not all monoliths. So we did this program again to answer questions, to help people understand, like people asked about language access. How do we communicate? And we had resident agencies say, like, we'll work in partnership with you. We will be there every step of the way. You can work with us to help communicate to your tenants. And what was great was we had a few dozen people sign up and say, okay, now that we have that knowledge, we're willing to rent to refugees and immigrants. And I think that's something I would love to see us continue to do, is really work on educating the public. To Mary Jane's point, there are some people that are hard-headed, that no matter what, they're gung-ho about, I want to continue to have this particular practices that we deem as unfair, right? But for the ones that are a little bit teachable, that want to be educated, I think being able to have programs to educate people and to realize that they are incredible community partners that are willing to walk hand in hand with you to be able to overcome the challenges that you might, foresee would come along the way.
I'd like to add something to this because at the Hispanic Corporation, we also have a business incubator and an employment program besides the housing program. But in the business incubator, we were helping immigrants to launch their companies. So those that have been with us for about 5 years already, so they're in the power of buying houses. So they're starting to buy houses. So now what we're trying to do is have these immigrants that 5 years ago were just starting from zero, and now they have the capacity to buy houses, to buy these properties, and let us work with them so that we can place families in those houses, because they understand, they're going to understand the requirement of the credit check. They're going to understand all of these things. So we're trying to little by little build this new now cycle of people so that they can contribute something back to the community. So that's something that we're trying to do.
Thank you so much. Can we talk about the impact that it has on people when they just cannot get the language access they need when it comes to housing?
Well, that's one thing that I have been very fighting for in the Latino community, again, because everybody assumes that people from Brazil will understand anyone who speaks Spanish, and that's not the case. I only know it because I speak Portuguese. So, that was one of the things that I said, we have to provide services in Portuguese also. And sometimes a language may be close to another language and people just assume, and it could be frustrating for somebody. They could feel discriminated. They could feel that they're left on the side. So, that's something that I think we're addressing. Now we have a Portuguese navigator that works at the Hispanic Corporation. And so to basically address these things, because yes, the majority of the people that we serve are Spanish speakers, but we see an increasing population of Brazilians arriving to Pittsburgh from about 1,000 people that were here, I don't know, 7 years ago, now being close to, we estimate 5,000 to 6,000 Brazilians. So it's growing, and so we're trying to address that.
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of training hundreds and hundreds of people, both youths who have had to interpret for families and service providers, excuse me, and I've talked to many people, so I don't want to speak with anyone's behalf, but I will say that people have shared with me that they feel shame, fear, otherness, unwelcome, shut down, disassociated, anxious, depressed, sad, like they don't belong and they shouldn't be here. People have reported feeling afraid and angry. People have reported feeling a lot of really complex and intense emotions, because it's not just housing, right? Anything that people who don't communicate in English attempt to use, resources, information, services, they're hitting this wall where there's no mechanism for them to be able to have equitable access, right? And when that's happening to somebody in every part of their lives, right? Housing, banking, grocery shopping, education, career, community, right? It really wears people down. And I think it can be really, I want
want to be careful not to be too reductive, to think of people who only communicate in English only in that context, right? However, it has a huge impact, excuse me, not only on those communities, but on the greater community as a whole, right? Because these populations aren't integrating, we're not able to count them when it comes to census time. And so we're not able to pull the funding we need to support the, and build infrastructure for people. And it's a really kind of negative feedback loop where people get trapped. And so the impact is far reaching, both on a personal level for folks, and I'm sure landlords as well, but also for communities and our city and our region as a whole. So again, just to say, we're not, in the mayor's office, we're not direct service, so I can't speak like Guillermo or Mary Jayne would. But again, just with the fact that we really pride ourselves on working with community. That's how it influences the work and the advocacy that we try to do internally. But even hearing the question, Rachel, about how unfair it is to deal with language, I'm thinking of even ID, right? Just think about the ways in which every single day you use your ID, or every single day how you use language to be able to read your medicine container. It's in English, right? If you're going down the street and you're seeing laws that tell you stop, seeing all those different things, it's in English. So think about how your life is made easy because you can read English. And then think about the opposite. If you were to, I know that Mary Jayne, you always do this exercise that you've done in our training, she tells you like, look at this document, where would you start to begin? And you start to put yourself in that shoe, how easy it is for you to navigate day-to-day life because you're simply able to understand the language that you're reading. And think about it for the opposite for others. If you don't have that ease, right, how would you be able to work with life? There was an example that one of our Hispanic organizations shared with us some years back on someone, actually, no, I apologize. It's one of our resettlement agencies. When you get mail, right? So this person gets mail. Normally they'll take it to the service provider to help read the mail because they don't understand. And they shared how this man in particular was very anxious, very scared because he didn't understand why he was getting this mail and thought, oh, there was something happening, only to go back and find out it was spam. It was nothing. It was simply because you don't understand the language, right? You have this added pressure, this added burden of fear, of depression, and already feeling I'm not accepted because I have my accent. People already shut down, and people who just want to be by themselves. It's really sad, but not to go in that route. But again, I'm just really encouraged by the folks that are listening online and the folks that are here. I believe that we're here or participating because we want to do something about it, right? And or really realize the need for this. And all to say, like, whatever we can do to make people who speak an accent or don't understand language to feel welcome and to know that they are part of a community, we have to do what we can, right? So that, again, whenever we interact or we see individuals that don't speak English, they know, like, hey, others might not necessarily welcome me this way, but there is someone that will.
I'd like to add something just quickly. So all of our workshops, seminars, webinars, flyers, invitations to events that we do, they're all in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So when we put them in the social media, email them to, our database to all of our members and community individuals. So we would like people to receive information in their language so they can process the information and understand it. That's something that my staff sometimes like, do we have to do it? Because, it's 3 languages. So I said, yes, we always have to do the 3 languages. And how can that impact? So for example, there are times when we have webinars or workshops on how to build your credit. And here comes the bank and they're doing the workshop. And there's 18 people that are Spanish speaking, but then there's 2 people that speak Portuguese. And so because of those 2 people, we have to have the workshop in Spanish and in Portuguese. So we make sure that people learn. And so, because all with the implication, people won't come, in the future, they won't attend because we just assume that they understand things because it's in Spanish. So that's one of the things that we do that are very important for people don't feel that they're not being taken in consideration.
and we're talking about that feeling of otherness and, you know, how we want this to really be a welcoming city and what can we do? And, you know, Faye, you've had such an impact with the city departments and making it a more welcoming place to, you know, think about what it's going to be like for someone who is not a native English speaker or who can read English to be able to navigate through our building and to get the services that they need. And, you know, you've all seen just so many examples of people's entire worlds being, you know, upturned because they cannot read or understand the language around them. And it's hard to think about, but it is a very real thing for all of them. So I'm so glad that you're bringing it forth and, like, you know, shining a light on it today. Can we talk about how, you know, we can get people the translation or interpretation assistance when they're seeking housing?
Well, that's very easy. Just contact the Hispanic Corporation, providing we have a hotline number. People can call or text, and we normally get back to them within 24 hours. Initial contact. So because we are the entity doing this to address Spanish and Portuguese speakers, and we have a system where we have a person that chose. We call that person the intake navigator. So that person, all it does is answer the phone, make sure that somebody gets back to that person, and then refer them to the appropriate navigators depending on the language and the things that they were looking at. Little by little, we're trying to make progress. You have to understand that we started all of this with one person, and there's more to do. And so the fact that we have been growing is a good positive thing for Pittsburgh, because that means people are coming and they're staying. And I must say that when we help somebody to have a welcoming experience and be able to actually find a house and be able to go through the entire process, wherever they came from, they're going to tell those people that they know where they came from, that they had that experience. And then this is when you start seeing people, oh, you know what? There's agencies that are helping you. There's government that is friendly there. So come here, and that's how we get people. That's how we have been getting people, basically.
Someone in the audience just said resource navigators, community healthcare workers.
Be like resource specialists.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things, when you do call these places and finally make a connection, some of them are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not being properly trained with things like called Q&A questions and answers, that these calls are monitored to put them in compliance. They think they can talk to you any kind of way, throw their little attitude. When I was trained in customer service, because that's what it was, a big part of their customer service, how you come off, how you treat people, what you want them to demand. We were always taught the customer is always right. Now, you know, they might be doing things, things refrain from using cuss words, because that could be mentally emotional for you. You deserve to be protected too. But it was never you gonna talk to me like that, or you're being so rude. We always try to give good hospitality, good love. You learn that in the church as well as you go on. You just don't talk to treat me when you come on. I know for me, I'm saying I don't. But I see the adversary, the enemy, how they come off, and they'll take the saints and as a saint about, according to the world, we're close enough. But because how they are trained to do, they're not being liable, they're not responding back, they're not getting in there, and they're not following up on calls, because someone can be on that line and cause so much stress on that person. They really have to get 302, seek a psychiatrist, spiritual type, and then guess what? Now you're liable. See, now we can take your stuff right on up to the court. Oh, you just stressed me out so much. See, I learned how to get them in that system. They like to throw that 302 around. Yeah, they think you got mental health. Honey, they can get together and lie, say anything. You got their little team, and you know what? You got God. And sometimes God gonna strengthen you when the enemy is trying to make you lie. He's gonna come to your defense. You gotta watch the seed that you sowed. I try to sow good seed. My hands God to love, my feet God to the gospel. And I try to watch what I say. But when I'm under attack, or beasts is on me like crazy. You know anything about the Bible, Daniel chapter, but I'm going on. But as you can see, like in my house, you see the torment that I'm actually going through. And that's why it's a dreadful beast. It is enough to drive you crazy if God don't intercede or make you snap out. You turn on the news, it's shameful for God. Somebody and just snap, and killed up a whole bunch of people, or they went down for and shot that whole gate, or they got a way of releasing curses and viruses, dangerous. And my daughter does Uber Eats, and I was talking to and I'm gonna let you go on, I want to share this one thing. We gotta be careful to see so what campground wrong. Okay, there is territory, the Saints territory and the devil has territory. That's real. Because see, when you begin to get understanding, you can feel the danger out there. It is really no joke. Lord, please cover me with the blood of Jesus. Don't let me be in the path of somebody who just got stressed out by someone. Now they're gonna blow my head off, stab me to death, or rape, assault me. Please protect me. And you gotta keep your faith. You can't be afraid. Because he's gonna take care of us if we belong to Jesus. But the world, they get a real big attitude and they get real nasty, but when they attacking the saints, honey, it's coming back on them. So your hands to God. And Jesus is the answer. In everything you do, this nation is all about Jesus. Don't be fooled. This is a holy sanctified nation. Look at that money. It says involved in trust. You don't see no S. And these people have no understanding. They're getting all up into the Congress, all up and all. They're coming down. Because you're going to see when you see God's word is not a lie. We got a good foundation. I hear the progress, y'all talking about the cares and all that. We gotta keep that, but don't forget the word of God. Jesus Christ is Lord. That is the answer. Everything we got.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for that. And I think, you know, the thing that I always go back to is, you know, in terms of how to get language services, language assistance to people, is taking the onus off of people who don't communicate in English. And as service providers, as landlords, as government agencies, you know, being prepared, right? Have a budget line, right? It's always going to be an afterthought if you don't have a budget line, right? You're going to need some money for it.
Jesus, the numbering of Jesus, the Bible says the kingdom of God is nothing, and it is finished. Keep in mind, the numbering God is not like ours. He told Abraham and Isaac, they tried to do it their way, and they got the child of flesh, and then they went to God promised, and then that's what he said. His number, I'll bless your seed, you won't have room enough, it will be like the stars. So with that, when you get understanding, it's hard for these people, once they come into the understanding of God, with his love, he got a vengeance, and he got a love, he gonna take care of us. You're gonna see there's gonna be nothing that we can't do in Jesus. That's, but without him, towers that get scattered. That's how we got all the different religions. Because their minds are sick with the devil. They get together with the imagination. That's why we got all these languages. But the one language I've always wanted is the language of God.
Yeah, and I think, you know,
That's going to unite us.
and you know, just in the interest of like language access specifically, I think, you know, faith groups and faith can play a role, but also, you know, cities and organizations really have to take responsibility for it, right? Get a language services provider. If you're using volunteers, train them, right? People who are bilingual, I call them bilingual helpers. You know, teach them how to interpret correctly so that they're not further alienating people by not communicating all of the information, right? Have things translated. Make sure that you're not relying on community-based nonprofits all the time, because they're also overextended and they don't have the funding to solve the problem for you, right? And so I don't ever like to shame people for not having these things in place. I like to say, hey, this is new for all of us. So, you know, let's work together and build this infrastructure. And that's what that means, right? You have to vet and have a provider, have a budget, have a plan. And even if it's a small budget and a small plan to start, it's something, right? And you can build from that.
Thanks, Mary Jane. And of course, we're not direct service provider. I was going to say that PHDC has made themselves available. But I'll just say, I know that within city government, we do have departments specifically that works on our empty lots program and such. So I'll just encourage people to call the mayor's office. Again, we do have a telephonic interpretation line where we could get an interpreter on the phone to kind of help navigate whatever questions people might have. Also, we have an adjacent city government URA, Urban Redevelopment Authority, that also has a lot of different housing programs as well. And they also have language access. If you ever need help trying to navigate or kind of get in contact, please, you can email us at welcomingpgh@pittsburghpa.gov. Our constituent affairs team
The mayor's office is also incredible. You could email neighbors@pittsburghpa.gov. And again, we would help try to connect you to the right people. Again, PHDC is very instrumental, very big in our region. And we just appreciate working with them too. So whichever way we could help plug people in. I see you, ma'am. I would send it to Jam and Rachel to call on you.
Yeah, the question is, are there apps that you can use for language access that you're aware of?
Google tends to be the most popular. Besides using the Google app to write and translate, if you see now, it has a little microphone, and you click at that microphone and you speak, it actually speaks back in the language that you choose. That's one of the ones that is the easiest, in my opinion, for anyone to use it, if they have never had experience with apps. Other than that, yeah, there's so many in the App Store that you can download. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay $1 or $2 or $5. It depends on what there is. I don't know the city or you have some apps, but
Yeah, I'll put my language access, technologies professor hat on and say that there are tons of apps. Some are better than others. The big thing to think about though is that never use apps if you have vital information to share, right? They're great tools, but I like to look at language access and language assistance really holistically. So there are interpreters, translators, apps, right? There are a ton of different tools in your toolbox. Google Translate is great. Machine translation has actually gotten very, very good, but you wouldn't want to use it to like translate the instructions for, medication for a child, right? You wouldn't want to use it to talk about legal stuff, with the lease and things like that. So for those sorts of things, I would always recommend having an interpreter present or, getting things professionally translated. But the apps are great for reaching out to people, making phone calls, texting, just staying in touch. The only thing to caution is that machine translation quality varies depending on the language pair. So for Spanish, it's very good. Chinese, it does a good job. Arabic, Portuguese does a pretty good job. But when you start getting into, I don't know, Kirundi or Kinyarwanda, some of the other languages that we have here, Dore, Pashto, it's just not there yet, Nepali. So it depends on the language, but I think these can be really powerful tools for communication. And yeah, Google Translate, ChatGPT is awesome. None of it's going to be perfect, but if you have just basic information to get across, they're great. Oh, and also phone interpretation. Right? If you're a landlord, you can get and use this technology pretty cheaply. It can be maybe $1 a minute. If you have a 20-minute call, it would cost you $20 to call one of your tenants and figure out what's going on. And I would consider that technology, right? There are apps that do this. There are service providers that do this. And I'm always happy to share resources if anybody ever wants to reach out.
One of the things that we're doing actually next week, we're starting. We now have a partnership with Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, and so we will be having courses for Google, the basis of Google, and so within that we're going to include the translation feature because of the community that we serve, and there will be different levels and groups of attendees. There will be people that will be at the basic level. There will be people that will be more advanced because not everybody's at the same kind of level. So there's something that we're trying to do to address and respond to the community. And little by little, what we want is the community to advance and therefore have a positive impact in the region.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to highlight the telephonic interpretation as just being so essential to our organization. Having that available has made it much easier for our staff to be able to communicate with non-English speakers that are calling us for the first time and are very confused. And, you know, even if it's not our organization that they're really trying to reach and they just, you know, happen to hit a live person who is willing to do the interpretation for them, we're able to get them connected with some resources that are really essential for them. And we're gonna, I want to open it up to questions. And I don't know. Jim has an online question, sorry.
The question that was asked, what language does mayor's office help with? But maybe I'll rephrase it. What languages does the city of Pittsburgh have interpretation or translation access to?
Awesome, thanks, guys. Okay, so what's great about the platform that we have is we don't have language access for one particular language. We have a provider that's able to provide a variety of languages. So whenever you call that line and you have the language, if it's Dari, if it's Pastor, if it's Spanish, if it's Swahili, if it's Nepali, if it's Chinese, you're able to get an interpreter. Those are some of the languages that we tend to see: Spanish, Nepali, Chinese. Those are some of our top three that we see. Russian. So again, it's just what's great about this telephonic interpretation that we're talking about is those providers have access to more than one interpreter, some hundreds. So whenever we have those constituents who call, we're able to get an interpreter to help us communicate that specific language, if that makes sense. I hope it's clear. Yeah. If not, Mary Jayne can clarify. No.
Yes.
I have several questions, but I just want to follow up on this particular question. So somebody does not speak English and they need to make a phone call to government. Make it the city of Pittsburgh, because you got a system. So what happens on, what's the first thing that happens when the phone gets answered at the city hall? Is there a message in English and somebody has to be able to pick different things? How does the non-English speaker say, I need to talk so-and-so in this language?
I mean, I can speak for our departments. We have a phone system set up that will give the message in English and give the option for Spanish as well, only because those are the top two. Otherwise, it's just the standard push 0 to reach our receptionist. You'll get connected with an actual staff member who will do their best to identify the language with the person that's on the line, get connected with our interpretation line, and they will, depending on how difficult it is to find that particular language or dialect at that time, then we can get them connected with somebody. And if it really doesn't just work out that way, we do our best to try and reconnect with that person so that we can set up a time to meet with them in person, schedule an in-person interpreter at a later date so that we can get the most information that we possibly can. But I don't know if you all have questions.
Just to say, when you call the mayor's office, you're not getting a computer, you're getting a person at the end of the line. So if you just say Spanish, she's already been trained to call the interpreter, and then a third person comes and has that interaction. So there is no computer that is reading any instructions to you. You are reaching someone in the mayor's office that's going to be able to communicate with you.
Better than most places. Then.
You say you have several questions.
Yeah, you talk about a model lease that's in Spanish.
Well, actually, we're talking about two things. The first thing is what the Hispanic Corporation has been doing with landlords. So what we do is we ask them for their lease and we translate that lease that they use in Spanish to the best possible way that we can. And that's the lease is explained. Our goal is that page by page, the tenant understands what's in the lease and we ask them to initial that. That way, the landlord knows that we use their lease for the explaining of the such document. That's what we have been doing, and I'm gonna let them speak about the other project that's going on.
Thank you. So the one that we're doing in the mayor's office, this is a general lease, so it doesn't pertain to a particular landlord. It's birthed out of different leases that we're seeing. I've been able to create one that is comprehensive, of course, doesn't have specific clauses that other tenants might have. And actually, if you go on the, I know you guys have talked about the interactive site that you guys have built. We have the template there if you actually want feedback from people. I know my colleague is watching online now. You get a chance to actually review it, answer some questions to let us know. If you're a landlord, we really want to hear from you. Really want to know if this is something that you think makes sense or provide feedback for us. Again, we have it in English and Spanish. We've already gotten a lot of feedback from community members to have it in many other languages, but before we commit to that, we really want to get feedback from landlords. But again, it's a model lease, very general. As we can imagine, I'm sure that other landlords might want specific clauses there, but this is a general lease. If people have the opportunity to give feedback on, so if you go on the, you guys will give the instructions later. You could go and you can actually read the lease, and please, we want your feedback when you do.
This could be something that could be addressed to the landlords association, perhaps unify that so that it's a requirement rather than an option. So that there's, and then because if you make it a requirement, then you can have the leases translated into all different languages, and then people could be addressing and learning, like you had Chinese, you have whichever, then people will know what's in their leases and be able to address that, but if it's possible.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. To access the sample lease on our VFairs website, the platform that you use to register for this event, it's located in the exhibit hall for the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, their table. You'll be able to find it there, and there should be some contact information to submit any feedback that you may have. And please feel free to share it. Anything that's in the exhibit hall is able to be downloaded and saved for later. You can email it to yourself. So please feel free to share widely with anyone you think may be interested. Jim, do we have any additional questions online today?
We don't, but I will say the model lease, I believe, was created in partnership with FHP, which means that if you were to give feedback on it and eventually use it, there is a fair housing lens on the lease, which means that there's a greater protection from discrimination, which I think is amazing about this particular tool.
There were shout out to Megan. I didn't think she was there.
Yeah. Fair Housing Partnership of Greater Pittsburgh was essential in the creation of that and applying that fair housing lens. So thank you to Megan for that. John.
I just want to say for like a resource perspective that any of the housing programs at the Urban Redevelopment Authority, we did like speak with the city about what languages are most utilized. So we did translate all of our program flyers into 7 different languages that are most used in the city. So if anybody needs access to those anytime, let us know. We can provide those. In addition to what we've already discussed, where we do have that language access for any other languages. We need to speak with somebody about our programming. But thank you to Global Wordsmiths who helped us translate all of those documents. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there so the information is people they need those resources.
I just want to say one last thing. Everything that we talked about is really good. Everyone, a lot of this stuff. I do feel we got a very good government, very sophisticated, sanctified, spiritual, that didn't just get here in one day. If you look at the structure, it's been under some work, made a lot of progress. I don't want to lose myself trying to do everything to find out get nothing done. One of the most important things, I'm gonna give you the right down to the point. Every one of these departments, all your resources, need a communications department. When these people that connect them to get them in compliance. Okay, it doesn't cost me nothing if I'm being told I can go to the Small Business Association, and then when I get there, the gangster me out of position, or somebody's tapping into my email, stealing the grant that I'm entitled to, Because that's the sick mind of the devil. What you think is yours, and God make it, they want and they will steal. That's why there's two kingdoms, the liar and the thief, and the kingdom of God. They don't mix. So we need all these departments to have a communications department with the compliance. Take the complaint however it comes, over the phone, through the mail, and open up the full communication. Stop shutting down progress, trying to make everything electronic. So that's a quick, easy way for everyone to say, oh, you don't got a phone, you don't got email. Now you can't get no progress done, can't even get a job, because you gotta have a mailing address. And what is it's the sick mind. The communications department, get them in compliance to report back. And should they have to report back that, there should be somebody to have it, and when they're not doing that, we gotta get them. Quit letting this slide, and you just running all over the place, and next thing you know, you just disestablished, because you've been snowballed down. That's a shame. So one of the things I want to say is getting the compliance going on, and when we don't get the help, getting them back in order. Yeah, no, you're not getting out of it. You review that call, you have no business acting like that. Why are you acting like that? You don't know what this woman was calling it, what her situation is. You could have blocked this one across this. Also, multi-million-dollar business, you want to put a price tag for when it all goes out. I got ministry in Jesus. You acting simple. You don't know, you could have been causing someone to commit suicide, because our ministry reaches all the levels of Jesus. I'm with the church. So all you got don't mean nothing. You got the devil tearing it all down. So communications, compliance, that links to the church. It's the church, that we can't forget about the church and the word of God. Now, the only thing I want to say is, how can I go about, I got some stuff for our church and stuff for our people. And we want to add on to the progress, we want to help in that progress. You know, so is 503C the only one that is considered nonprofit? Because even in the nonprofit, there's a profit. You get paid, souls get won to Christ, somebody's child got fed, somebody's marriage was saved, somebody didn't commit suicide, somebody didn't get a mass murder. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
It's the nonprofit, but in the profit, there is much to win for Jesus.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to connect after this session,
Yeah.
because it goes a little outside of the purview of the language access stuff, but I do want to acknowledge what you said about the city services, and, you know, unfortunately, poor service knows no language barrier, and fortunately, we do have the 311 department, and I know that you mentioned the technology barrier as well. But I believe they do still receive complaints in person at the is it the mayor's office still? Yeah, so they do, they're the connectivity between all of the different city departments and authorities. So if you do have something to report, that would definitely be the place that I'd recommend.